Before my delegation present statement wishes to set the record straight with respect to the report of the Commission of Inquiry that the Special Rapporteur mentioned in her presentation. That report was not endorsed by the Human Rights Council.
I'm very sad to hear that the representative is saying that this report was not endorsed by the Human Rights Council. I would like to say that if the report was not, then I wouldn't be having a mandate to continue work on its recommendations. So it needs to be set straight. So this report is on the table, has been endorsed, and I had the opportunity and the privilege last year to come here in front of you and to present that report to the whole of to this hall. So
I have to refer to the report of the Human Rights Council. I draw the attention of the committee to check the resolution that was adopted last year. Specifically, the Human Rights Council noted the report of the Commission of Inquiry. That is what it is. I think I need to also point to that fact.
Now invite the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea, Ms. Sheila Keetharuth, to make an introductory statement. Ms. Keetharuth, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairperson, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I address you as the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea, and I'm honored to brief you for the 5th time in this capacity. The Human Rights Council extended my mandate for 1 year in Resolution 35/35, adopted without a vote, and requested me to follow up as appropriate on the implementation of the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea, as well as those found in my own reports. I would like, first of all, to congratulate Eritrea for being one of the 2 countries in Africa which have completed the critical costing phase of their pandemic preparedness and response plans in health security, according to a recently released report. I also welcome that in July this year, the World Heritage Committee inscribed Eritrea, the Eritrean capital Asmara, to the World Heritage List. It is a first entry for Eritrea. However, on the key human rights violations, namely death in custody, extrajudicial executions, arbitrary detention, breaches of the rights to freedom of expression and religion, among others, I have received further information indicating that these have not stopped. I provide details now. There is no change in the duration of the national service, which remains indefinite, beyond the 18 months provided for by the laws of Eritrea. The country still has no constitution that would provide for constitutional protection for fundamental human rights, no independent judiciary, no legislative assembly. In fact, no institutions that could ensure checks and balances, as well as invaluable protection against the misuse of power by the state. First, I would like to deal with the issue of accountability for past human rights violations. The Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea called on the government of Eritrea to ensure accountability for past and persistent human rights violations amounting to crimes against humanity. These include enslavement, imprisonment, enforced disappearance, torture, and other inhumane acts, persecution, rape, and murder. The COI recommended the establishment of independent, impartial, and gender-sensitive mechanisms to provide victims with adequate redress, including the right to truth and reparations. I'm not aware that Eritrea has proceeded with the required far-reaching and substantial institutional and legal reforms required for the domestic legal system to hold perpetrators of international crimes to account in a fair and transparent manner. Above all, I remain particularly concerned at the failure of the Eritrean government to put in place measures to ensure accountability for military personnel for sexual and gender-based violence during national service, extensively documented by the Commission of Inquiry. Another avenue for tackling impunity recommended by the Commission of Inquiry was the call on member states to exercise jurisdiction over crimes against humanity when any alleged offender is present on their respective territories, or extradite him or her to another state in accordance with its international obligations. Given the long-term perspective required for Eritrea to tackle impunity itself, or for other recommendations made by the Commission, such as a Security Council referral to the International Criminal Court or the setting up of an accountability mechanism under the aegis of the African Union, it is essential to explore alternative approaches, such as universal jurisdiction, to ensure accountability for human rights violations where such violations amount to crimes against humanity. I plan to concentrate on raising awareness about the available accountability mechanisms while focusing on the role of victims in such processes. I now turn to extrajudicial executions. Now, military involvement in the extrajudicial executions of unarmed Eritreans attempting to cross the border, either individually or in groups, has surfaced on regular intervals. This is a military practice committed with impunity, without any investigations, with no explanations provided for the death, while the Eritrean authorities have vehemently disputed that such a policy of shoot to kill exists at its border. Repeated allegations and documented cases show that several people, including children, have been killed while attempting to cross the border. I now turn to arrest and detention. I have continued receiving communications about arrest and detention in the capital city, in Asmara. The modus operandi remains the same as what I have documented before. People arrested and detained are not told why their physical liberty is being infringed. They are not taken before a court of law to determine the legality of their detention. They have no contact with the outside world, not even with lawyers or their close family members, who can only bring food and clean clothes for them, handed over to prison guards. There is no information at all provided on specific cases, and there is no indication whether they will be released. Mr. President, allow me to pause here and solicit your thoughts and those of delegates here about the moving story of a late Eritrean freedom fighter arrested in 2003. For 14 years, he was held without charges, without access by a lawyer or any family member, and without official confirmation to his loved ones that he was being detained. For 14 years, the family had no information about him. Questions remain unanswered about the causes of his detention and even his state of health. Through informal means, the family got to know where he was held. This summer, the prison authorities arrived at his family home, notified the members of his family about his sudden death in detention, and handed over his body. Notwithstanding the grief and sorrow, the family treasured the fact that they were at least allowed to bury the body. I fail to understand why the handing over of the dead body of someone who had been held in one of Eritrea's prisons without any contact with the outside world for 14 years should exonerate the Eritrean authorities from the human rights violations they have blatantly committed. Indefinite imprisonment without charge or trial until death which in effect amounts to a life sentence without the pronouncement of a court of law, is absolutely unacceptable in any country where the rule of law prevails. Now, freedom of religion and belief. Eritrea recognizes only 4 religions: the Evangelical Church of Eritrea, the Orthodox Church of Eritrea, the Roman Catholic Church, and Sunni Islam. Over the past 5 years, I have regularly obtained information that the government of Eritrea interferes in the internal matters of recognized religions through controls and invasive policies, including the lack of provision for exemption for military service for conscientious objection. Reports of arrest and detention targeting individuals for their religious beliefs have reached me on a regular and even recently basis. These include followers of both recognized and non-recognized religious denominations. I have also learned recently of arbitrary arrest and detention of Muslims during prayer meetings. In August, a mother of 4 died in detention in a desert camp, allegedly after having been arrested 3 months earlier during raids directed at evangelical Christians. Similar arrests during raids targeting prayer meetings and house-to-house searches were reported for the month of July and August in and around Asmara. Now I'd like to turn to the issue of protection of refugees and non-refoulement. According to last week's update by IOM, the organization is relocating an average of about 100 persons per day, which represents an increase in what has been the most continual flow of refugees into a neighboring country in 2017. According to the figures, there were about 21,215 new Eritrean refugees arrivals across the border in Ethiopia in 2016, while over 20,000 have arrived in 2017 to date. Most of the refugees are youth, with 46% of the total transported by IOM aged between 18 to 24 years old. Many of them report walking for days to reach their destination. Now, while measures are being put in place by various countries aimed at reducing the number of Eritrean asylum seekers and refugees, at best, such efforts will lead to temporary respite, reducing arrival figures for a short while, but they will not be able to stop people from crossing deserts and seas in search of safe havens, as no barrier will be insurmountable for someone fleeing human rights violations. Both the Commission of Inquiry and myself, in my different reports, have addressed violations of the right to property. In this context, I have noted with concern that the acting president of the Greek community in Asmara have been asked to evacuate the building complex of the community, which includes the premises of the honorary consul of Greece, as well as offices of the Greek community. The Greek community has been in possession of this building complex for decades, and this latest example of the infringement of the right to property in Eritrea should be redressed. Now, my concluding remarks, Mr. President. I am aware that the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights is currently undertaking a mission to Eritrea for a workshop on human rights and the administration of justice to reinforce the capacity of rule of law professionals. I hope that this will strengthen implementation of human rights treaties at the domestic level. I welcome the fact that the international attention to the human rights situation in Eritrea has also allowed for renewed engagement by the government with international actors. I hope that the cooperation with OHCHR will develop into a real partnership leading to tangible changes of the situation on the ground. While I have provided areas to assist member countries to create their own benchmarks to assess the human rights situation in Eritrea, I think there are specific areas which need to be addressed. That is, putting in place strengthening institutions to reinforce the rule of law, a transparent human rights assessment and functioning of the justice system, the results of which should be made public. An assessment of the independence of judges, lawyers and prosecutors, unwavering respect for human rights in accordance with its obligations, backed by accurate data, promoting transparency to reveal the raw facts which will provide the basis for improvements, and of course, the fight against institutionalized impunity. So I therefore urge the government to ensure full application of international human rights norm while avoiding reprisals against those who express their views and opinions or advocate on issues which the government may deem controversial. My plea to the government of Eritrea is to create an environment where all Eritreans can enjoy and exercise all their human rights fully and in a non-discriminatory manner. I would like to reiterate to the Eritrean authorities that I remain available, as always, for an open and sincere dialogue on these and other human rights matters. I thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank Ms. Keetharuth for her statement, and I now open the floor for any comments and questions to the Special Rapporteur. And as before, I would like to request all delegations wishing to take the floor to press the mic button within the next 5 minutes, after which I will close the list. And I thank you for your cooperation on the time management. And I now give the floor to the Deputy Permanent Representative and Chargé d'Affaires of Eritrea. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Distinguished delegates, this is the 5th time the Special Rapporteur is appearing before the third committee in an informal setting whose biased work against Eritrea has been very clear. Her mandate was tabled and spearheaded by countries with known hostile stance against Eritrea, with the aim of demonizing and isolating Eritrea under the guise of human rights concerns. Eritrea all along has registered its rejection of any politically motivated country-specific mandate, and it equally opposes any abuse of the Human Rights Council by any country or group of countries for extraneous objectives. Bringing the issue from Geneva General Assembly is in itself a perpetuation of double standards and politicization of the lofty human rights objectives. Before my delegation presents statement wishes to set the record straight with respect to the report of the Commission of Inquiry that the Special Rapporteur mentioned in her presentation. That report was not endorsed by the Human Rights Council. Chair, in the face of the multiple challenges and hostilities, Eritrea has demonstrated its resilience and its steadfastness and has emerged as a stable, secure, and harmonious country. For the Eritrean people that was determined to safeguard its independence and chart its own development path, it was clear from the outset to step up to the demands of nation building through shared responsibilities and sacrifices without any let-up. Yet, Eritrea's journey for peace, development, and human dignity has been attacked. And the human rights objective has been obscured by the Special Rapporteur's involvement in political activism using any and every opportunity to target Eritrea. We continue to hear presentations from the Special Rapporteur that attempts to paint an unrealistic image of the country with a broad brush. Information that fits preconceived narratives were compiled selectively and presented as facts, while inputs that express different views were dismissed as irrelevant. Achievements and challenges of Eritrea were ignored, and the shortcomings were exaggerated and sensationalized to heighten concern. To meet the objective of the sponsors, the Special Rapporteur recommended unwarranted severe measures. This cannot be the work of an impartial individual. The methodology adopted and pursued by the Special Rapporteur lacks minimum level of rigor and professionalism. And I must add, it's not in consonant with the important principles highlighted in the GA Resolution 60/251 that stress impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity in the human rights endeavor. Chair, since on numerous occasions Eritrea has expressed its serious concern about the biased and unbalanced report prepared by the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Eritrea, my delegation will devote more time to sharing information about Eritrea's effort in the promotion and protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Eritrea's bilateral and multilateral dialogue and cooperation is growing. More member states and organizations are engaging with Eritrea on concrete actions that embody cooperative approach to the consolidation of human rights, as well as on broader pressing regional issue of peace and development. Eritrea welcomes such constructive engagement, and it will continue to do so. Eritrea concurs with the wider view of the UN membership that human rights objectives are best promoted in all countries through engagement, underpinned by cooperation and mutual respect. This approach is at the heart of what the Universal Periodic Review mechanism stands for. Chair, Eritrea faces human rights challenges like all member states in this room, and it does recognize the work ahead towards better and higher human rights standards. As a state party to several core international and regional human rights treaties, Eritrea has submitted its periodic reports to the different treaty bodies, such as the Committee on the Rights of the Child, the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, and the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. It has also submitted responses to communications emanating from the ILO. Furthermore, Eritrea has undergone through the first and second UPR mechanism. To expedite implementation of the recommendations accepted, Eritrea has established a UPR coordinating body composed of representatives of line ministries and civil society organizations. The meetings of this body are increasingly becoming more frequent with deeper human rights discourse. Last year, Eritrea concluded the Strategic Partnership Cooperation Framework with the United Nations, a program that runs from 2017 to 2021 with a specific budgetary allocation that has taken on board the implementation of all human rights commitments Eritrea made. The commitments are broad in their scope, covering the rights enshrined in the two important international covenants, namely the economic, social, and cultural rights and the civil and political rights. Chair, the supremacy and the respect of the law is being strengthened by maintaining equality before the law with the principle of non-discrimination as a major pillar. Public sensitization on the new national course at all levels is continuing to impart better understanding on the rights and responsibilities on the overall judicial system. The campaign on the due process is extensive and it covers all stakeholders, including public officials and enforcement agencies. Preparations are underway to translate the national course in all Eritrean languages. The courses are already available in 3 languages, Tigrinya, Arabic, and English. Chair, guided by its newly articulated development strategy, Eritrea has introduced salary increments of the youth on the basis of educational merit. Educational and skills development programs have also been expanded with the view of leaving no one behind. These measures are allowing the Eritrean National Service to evolve, while the core mission of the program, such as peace, unity, cohesion, resilience, and self-confidence, remains in place. Still, Eritrea regards these measures and the advances made in the provision of basic social services as modest and maintains that more needs to be done towards the bigger objective of raising the standards of living of its citizens. In this regard, building on its success of the MDG, implementation of the SDGs has become a top priority, and Eritrea will boost productivity and investment by further mobilizing its human and material resources. Eritrea is mindful of the enormous resources needed to implement the ambitious and transformative development agenda. And in this connection, Eritrea invites all member states to join it in its call to end Ethiopia's occupation and the unjustified sanctions which have been huge impediments to the development efforts of the country, not to mention their direct bearing on the full enjoyment of all human rights of its nationals. These obstacles cannot be dismissed as excuses by the Special Rapporteur, who views them as inconsequential to the rights of the Eritrean people. Another important pillar of the new development agenda or trend is the political process, which will cover defining the future governance system of the country supported by a new political roadmap. Chair, before concluding my delegation, I wish to say a word or two on the country-specific mandate on Eritrea. As alluded in the introductory part of the statement, there is regional and geopolitical dynamics that sees human rights instruments as a political tool that could be exploited and manipulated. The mandate that created and renewed the work of the Special Rapporteur continues to be negotiated and consulted mainly among some of our partners and the delegation of Ethiopia. This is a country with known egregious human rights abuses and a country that continues to occupy sovereign Eritrean territory in violation of international law, and a country that continues to advocate for the sanctions on Eritrea to be maintained and strengthened. So it is important to ponder, Chair, whether this is about human rights concerns for Eritreans by the government in Ethiopia or advancing its policy of conflict and destabilization by any other means. The evidence on the ground points to the latter. Chair, there is also the larger question whether country-specific mandates are useful tools in the promotion and protection of human rights. Lest we forget, country-specific mandates were the main source of concern and the reason for the General Assembly to establish a new body, the Human Rights Council, with the UPR as a key tool to scrutinize human rights records not only in developing countries but everywhere. So it is important that we don't undermine the UPR mechanism with proliferation of country-specific mandates in the promotion and protection of human rights in all countries. I thank you, Chair, for your attention.
I thank Eritrea. The list of speakers is closed. I have 22 requests for the floor, and it is clear that we will not get through our agenda today without turning to some very strict time management. We will have to limit speaking time to 1 minute per delegation. 1 minute per delegation. I'm very sorry for this, but it's just absolutely clear when we look at this and when we look at the participation in the other dialogues, we cannot end in a position where the last dialogue will be shorted because of the others. So, under these very strict time management, I give the floor to Djibouti to be followed by the United States. And as usually, I remind you to start with your most important points, whether it is a question or most important points. Djibouti, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, sir. First of all, my delegation would like to thank the Special Rapporteur, Ms. Sheila B, and we would like to urge her to continue her work. What she is doing is part of an effort of follow-up of the recommendations which were addressed by the Commission of Inquiry. The report was not presented to the General Assembly at its 72nd session as planned. Since 71, there have been problems with Eritrea who have been subjected to all kinds of objectionable practices without being protected. To date, taking into account this problem of its obligations with regard to international instruments and human rights bodies, Djibouti still is concerned by the 13 prisoners who are being held incommunicado in this country since 2008, and we would demand their initial release without condition. They are living in human conditions, and we will spare no effort to have them released.
United States to be followed by the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. We thank the Special Rapporteur for her report. The United States remains deeply concerned about the human rights situation in Eritrea and that Eritreans continue to seek refuge in other countries. We are encouraged by Eritrea's initiative to re-engage with the international community and look forward to continued dialogue. As the Special Rapporteur's report makes clear, however, serious concerns regarding Eritrea's human rights practices remain. We continue to call upon the government of Eritrea to comply with its constitution, develop an independent and transparent judiciary, improve detention conditions, and release individuals detained arbitrarily. We are concerned by the Special Rapporteur's finding that Eritreans continue to be arbitrarily detained for their religious beliefs. Among our most serious concerns is the indefinite nature of Eritrea's obligatory national service. Though Eritrean law limits national service to 18 months, in practice, conscription routinely exceeds this limit. Special Rapporteur,
United Kingdom to be followed by Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The UK remains concerned at the human rights situation in Eritrea. We continue to make clear to the government the need to ensure that those engaged in the national service system have a clearly defined limit to their period of service and receive financial compensation commensurate to their duties. The government should also implement the Constitution, respect freedom of religion or belief, and release those in arbitrary detention. The UK shares concerns about the plight of Eritrean refugees and will continue to work with the EU and regional partners in this regard. Action must be taken to tackle human rights violations and the overall lack of economic opportunity if the flow of people risking their lives is to be stemmed. We welcome the steps that Eritrea has taken through their programme of work with the UN and continued cooperation with OHCHR, including a visit by OHCHR to Eritrea this week. We would welcome the Special Rapporteur's thoughts on how the international community can further support the UN and OHCHR in their work to assist the government of Eritrea to improve the human rights.
Somalia to be followed by the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My delegation would like to commend the Special Rapporteur for the presentation of a report containing the latest developments of the human rights situation in Eritrea. My delegation is deeply alarmed by the serious information related to human rights concerns highlighted by the Commission that have not yet been addressed by the Eritrean government. We strongly condemn those violations and encourage the government of Eritrea to take all appropriate measures to seize them and to fully implement the recommendations of the Commission of Inquiry. Finally, we urge the Eritrean government to immediately release the 13 Djiboutian prisoners of war who are detained in Communicado and Eritrean prisoners and welcome the release of previously held one. I thank you.
European Union to be followed by Cuba.
Thank you, Chair. Madam Special Rapporteur, building on the issue of national service, we reiterate our call to the government of Eritrea to take forward immediate and substantial legal and institutional reform to improve the human rights situation in the country. We take positive note that the government continues to grant access to bilateral and international delegations. However, the ongoing refusal to grant access to the Special Rapporteur and other regional international rights mechanisms remains a concern. What are your plans for the last year of your mandate, and how could the EU contribute to a better cooperation between the Special Rapporteur and the government of Eritrea? Thank you.
Thank you. Cuba, followed by Nicaragua.
Madam Chairman, Cuba wishes to reiterate the principle of we do not support procedures against specific countries because these are particularly against developing countries. We urge that there be a new opportunity for cooperation and dialogue to provide the involvement of the regional and sub-regional organizations in Africa to deal with questions which could represent the subject of concern in the search for effective solutions that include the authorities of the country concerned, taking into account their concerns and to attain the purpose of truly helping the people of Eritrea. Thank you.
Nicaragua, followed by Belarus.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. We regret once again that this body of the United Nations is focusing on certain sending rapporteurs to specific countries in contravention of the principles of the United Nations. We're very concerned that there has been no recognition of what Eritrea has been doing to improve the situation at the international level, and all of the bodies of the United Nations have been involved, and we reiterate that the United Nations organ to consider human rights situations in all parts of the world is the Human Rights Council through the UP.
We believe uncounterproductive the activities on Eritrea. The United Nations should continue its efforts in establishing true dialogue with the government of Eritrea and technical assistance and assistance in accordance with the national priorities and needs of that country, including the recommendations of the UPR. We are convinced that only through a respectful dialogue can we have positive results in defending human rights. The many years of practice have shown that the activities of the country project are ineffective, and they do not have mandate access to the countries, and they cannot carry out monitoring except on a distance, and they do not really give reliable sources of information. Thank you.
Norway, followed by Ireland.
Thank you, Chair. Norway thanks the Special Rapporteur for her recent visit to Oslo and her continued dedication to accountability for victims of human rights violations. As a long-standing friend of Eritrea and its people, we remain deeply concerned about the grave human rights violations in the country. We, however, remain strongly committed to supporting the government of Eritrea in improving the human rights situation. We are encouraged to learn of recent cooperations with the UN on administration of justice and international and regional human rights norms and standards. We would be interested to hear from the Special Rapporteur whether we are witnessing a renewed interest from the government to cooperate on some specific areas as part of follow-up to the UPR. In your report, you refer to meetings on the human rights situations in Eritrea, one exploring the possible roles that regional mechanism might play. We would be interested to hear more about the outcomes of these discussions. Finally, we would also ask the Special Rapporteur how international partners, such as Norway, best could seek to work together with Eritrea on improving the situation in the country.
Ireland, followed by the Czech Republic.
Thank you. We reiterate our call on the Government of Eritrea to cooperate fully with the mandate of the Special Rapporteur and other international and regional human rights mechanisms by allowing access to the country and to places of detention so that a comprehensive assessment of the human rights situation in the country can be undertaken. We stress that cooperation and engagement between Eritrea and the international community is essential and regard as a positive step the access granted to visiting international delegations and the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. Special Rapporteur, you have noted that the Universal Periodic Review recommendations provide a framework for progress in improving the human rights situation in Eritrea. How do you view the progress of capacity-building cooperation in this regard, and how, in your view, can the international community best situate itself in terms of support, looking forward to the next review in 2019? Thank you.
Czech Republic, followed by Switzerland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Czech Republic aligns itself with the statement of the European Union. We would like to welcome Special Rapporteur and thank her for her important work as well as her latest report. We regret to note that the government of Eritrea does not cooperate with its mandate. We urge the government of Eritrea to offer its full cooperation. The human rights situation in Eritrea did not improve and massive human rights violations continue. In the Czech Republic's view, without genuine and periodic elections and political pluralism, it's impossible to promote human rights and democracy at a national level. As far as we know, the government of Eritrea did not organize the national elections for more than 20 years, and there is only one political party. Mr. Special Rapporteur, how could the international community help a transition of Eritrea to a pluralistic state with democratically elected representatives? Is any dialogue with the government possible in this regard? Mr. Special Rapporteur, we thank you and wish you very best in your important work. Thank you.
Switzerland, followed by China.
La Suisse remercie.
And thank you. I wish to thank the Special Rapporteur for her commitment and work. Grave violations of human rights as reported by the Special Rapporteur, and we accordingly Switzerland calls upon Eritrea to cooperate with all the human rights bodies and to pursue the recommendations, the country recommendations. We encourage Eritrea to strengthen its cooperation with the High Commissioner and to consider the establishment of a bureau in Eritrea. We reiterate our willingness to pursue dialogue and to cooperate with all of those involved. Madam Special Rapporteur, what are the priorities for the implementation of your mandate vis-à-vis the recommendations of the UPR, and how can the international community react in this connection? Thank you.
China, followed by Burundi.
Mr. Chairman, China always advocates constructive dialogue and cooperation as a way for countries to address their differences in the field of human rights. The international community should acknowledge the progress and achievements made by Eritrea in the promotion and protection of human rights. Human rights is an important part of a country's economic social development and should be advanced on the basis of national circumstances and the needs of the people. China calls on the international community to view the human rights situation in Eritrea in a comprehensive, fair, and objective manner and help Eritrea build capacity in the field of human rights according to its wish and needs. With their interests interlinked, countries of the Horn of Africa share will and woe. China sincerely hopes that they bear in mind the overriding need for peace and stability in the Horn of Africa and the fundamental interests of their people live in harmony, increase mutual trust, solve their differences through dialogue and consultations, and work together for development. This is the common interest of all the countries in the region. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Burundi, followed by India.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The delegation of Burundi has taken note of the report of the Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Eritrea and would like to reiterate its position in principle and oppose the mandate and the commissions of inquiry dealing specifically with a given country, which are counterproductive. My delegation believes that the United Nations has adequate machinery which can analyze the situation for human rights in all countries. We are referring here to the Universal Periodic Review, which is much more constructive and might yield more tangible results in Eritrea as elsewhere. Thank you.
India, followed by Venezuela.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. The primary responsibility for the promotion and protection of human rights lies with the states. We must continue to strengthen adherence to the fundamental principles of universality, transparency, impartiality, objectivity, non-selectivity, and constructive international dialogue while seeking to realize the human rights for all. The United Nations should base its relations with member states on dialogue, not on the imposition of country-specific mandates. Focus should be on strengthening the capacity of states, including by providing technical and financial assistance. The practice of considering country-specific situations is counterproductive and leads to politicization of human rights within the United Nations. The use of human rights for political ends constitutes a violation of the principles and objectives of the Charter of United Nations. India strongly supports the Universal Periodic Review as the appropriate mechanism for addressing human rights.
Venezuela, followed by Pakistan.
Gracias. Thank you, Madam Chairman. The Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela takes note of the statement made, and we would like to confirm our position of principle on the procedures, special principles, or any other mechanism on the situation of human rights in specific countries which do not enjoy the authorization of the country concerned. We reject selectivity in the treatment of this subject for politically motivated reasons, because this represents a violation of the principles of the Charter of the United Nations. Venezuela urges that there be development in depth on the positive developments through the Human Rights Council and through the UPR as a formula of cooperation to deal with the question of human rights in an atmosphere of constructive dialogue and respect. Thank you.
Pakistan, followed by Egypt.
Madam Chair, Pakistan firmly believes that promoting human rights is a shared responsibility that can only be achieved through constructive approach of cooperation and inclusion rather than politicization and selectivity. Madam Chair, the government of Eritrea's cooperation with Universal Periodic Review Mechanism and with all treaty bodies to which it is party, as well as the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, is reflective of its commitment to engage constructively and positively with the international mechanism. Eritrea's cooperation with multilateral and bilateral partners to consolidate human rights of its citizens manifests for societal commitment to the democratic process. Madam Chair, there is a need to promote greater coherence between the work of the Third Committee and the Human Rights Council and avoid unnecessary duplication. In this regard, we would like to emphasize the significance of the Universal Periodic Review, which is the main intergovernmental cooperative mechanism to review human rights issues at the national level. Thank you.
Egypt to be followed by Zimbabwe.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. At their summit in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, the heads of state of government of NAM emphasized the role of the Human Rights Council as the United Nations body responsible for considering human rights situations in all countries. They also expressed deep concern over continued practice of selective adoption of country-specific resolutions in the Third Committee. That position was reiterated once again during the last NAM summit in Margarita, Venezuela, in September of last year. They noted that such resolutions are a tool that exploit human rights for political purposes that breach the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity in addressing human rights issues. It is in this regard that Egypt believes that the Universal Periodic Review of the Human Rights Council is the main intergovernmental mechanism that is tasked to review human rights issues at the national level. We believe that human rights and fundamental freedoms should be addressed through a cooperative and non-confrontational manner without interference. We do not support the work of country-specific mandate holders as a general principle, as we believe in the need to...
Zimbabwe to be followed by Bangladesh.
Zimbabwe would like to aid its voice among member states that have been consistently opposed to the submission of country-specific reports or resolutions. We believe that the Human Rights Council, through the mechanism of the Universal Periodic Review, is the appropriate forum to deal with any human rights concerns in any member state. Eritrea has already gone through 2 cycles of the Universal Periodic Review and accepted 92 recommendations. We would like to urge the 2 parties to continue cooperating with each other to address the mutually agreed human rights concerns. Let us all demonstrate our goodwill in order to truly leave no one behind and move together in search of the human rights we all deserve. I thank you.
Bangladesh to be followed by Iran.
Mr. Chair, my delegation thanks the Special Rapporteur for her report and briefing. As a member to Human Rights Council, Bangladesh is strongly committed to the promotion and protection of universal human rights and fundamental freedoms. Our commitment to human rights flows from our constitution. Bangladesh reiterates that human rights are indivisible and mutually reinforcing. For improvement of the overall human rights situation of countries, international community needs continuous engagement with the government, civil society actors, and all other stakeholders, keeping people at the core of all such efforts. We, however, are of the view that gross violations of human rights should be dealt forthrightly following due process of law with accountability and transparency, as well as to ensure that no one can get away with impunity. International community should remain alert on gross and unabated violation of human rights that may have regional and international ramifications and should be dealt with due seriousness by all concerned. To this end, we took note of various measures taken by Eritrea to protect and promote human rights of its citizens. We commend them.
Islamic Republic of Iran to be followed by our last speaker, the Russian Federation.
My delegation aligns itself with the statement made by Venezuela on behalf of NAM. Islamic Republic of Iran once again underlines its principled position concerning the report presented by this SR on the human rights situation in the Eritrea, that the duplicative practice of considering country-specific situations in the Third Committee of the GA and exploitation of these platforms for political ends is in breach of the principles of universality, non-selectivity, and objectivity and non-interference in addressing human rights issues and undermines cooperation and dialogue among governments as essential requirements for promotion and protection of all universally recognized human rights. We reiterate our conviction that the UPR mechanism is the right venue for reviewing the human rights situation in all member states on an equal basis with full participation of the Council governments. Thank you.
The Russian Federation.
Thank you. Like many other delegations, we would have to note that the consideration of this subject of human bodies, organizations of the United Nations can hardly promote the improvement of the situation with human rights in a given country. We reaffirm our position with regard to the fact that questions about the situation of human rights in a different country should be considered only in a constructive manner, fully covering all of the interesting states. And we think the best platform for this is the Universal Periodic Review. Only equitable and mutually respectful cooperation and not trying to please some states' interests will help us to make further progress in the human rights system of the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you, and I give the floor to the Special Rapporteur to respond to questions and comments made by delegations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll take the responses through themes because this is what I have noted. A number of countries have talked about cooperation at bilateral level, countries visiting Eritrea, etc. I think this is a very, very good sort of improvement on the situation, which needs to continue. However, my concern is that such bilateral meetings should also include, within the talking points and within follow-up, whatever human rights issues which are required. These need to be part of conversations and not to be swept under the carpet for other reasons. So while I am very much sort of encouraged by this, I would also have a plea to all those who have bilateral relations and are in the process of conversations to remember the centrality of human rights. With regards to OHCHR's visit and the improvements in capacity building, etc., which I do believe is a great progress from the situation. However, OHCHR's role shouldn't be only with regards to capacity building. I don't go to Eritrea, but they do. They should also have a monitoring mandate to have another pair of eyes who have the access to the country and be able to verify and talk about issues on human rights in the country itself. I would also like to talk about the issue of religious rights have come up, and for this, it's something which is very much a priority for my mandate also, and I do believe there is a lot to be done. And the first thing, a positive thing, which could be a good point for Eritrea is to release Father Antonios, the Abune Antonios, who has been under house arrest for the past, if I'm not mistaken, over 10 years or so. So that's something very important. Plans for the last year of my mandate. I started this mandate in 2012. I'll be ending as per the required rules of the Council after 6 years. I think the most important achievements which have been mine has been to be able to bring human rights issues to on the international agenda with the kind of pair of eyes which has gone through each and every one, which has been to raise all the different violations. I will continue now with the last few years to ensure that in the context of accountability, there's more capacity building involving survivors of human rights violations for them to be able to know what mechanisms exist. But I would also have liked to have more constructive dialogue with the country itself. I spent the first 2 years of my mandate trying to build bridges with the country, but it had been a wall that I found and not a bridge. So I do hope that within these last few months that a bridge would be extended to the mandate so that we can look at serious issues which have occupied my work for the past 5 years. I have heard a lot about the UPR being the preferred sort of mechanism for human rights in Eritrea and other countries, of course, as well as that country mandates should, there's no reason for country mandates. However, what I would say, I don't think there is an exclusivity between these. As many mechanisms looking at human rights in the country, the best it is for each and every one. It's the same. Treaty bodies, and I'm glad that the representative of Eritrea has talked about the connection of Eritrea with the other treaty bodies, the CEDAW plus the CRC, etc. And I really believe that as many people looking at a situation is the way to go. So it's not really exclusive and to be looked at in a negative manner. The other point, there are many issues also I would have liked to raise, but if I start into the details, it's going to take us longer than the 10 minutes that the chair has allowed me. So let me quickly just go through one other sort of aspect which I would like to put in the context of my discussion here. For example, detention. There are still lots of people in detention. Nobody knows exactly the number of those who haven't had their day in court and who are detained in arbitrary manner. That would be an area which I really encourage Eritrea to look into. And of course, to ensure that there, in fact, the institutional mechanisms which need to be in place for people to be able to access justice, for people to be able to feel that the checks and balances that are required are there. The right to participate in participation in governance, in political decisions, etc., is in fact of human rights. ICCPR, I don't need to quote, and I think this is something where we need to ensure that people have their voice also. I don't have the answer in terms of the exact issues to bring to the table, but it's part of the conversation which needs to start and to be continued. I will be ending on this, but I need to set the record straight before I do that. It's with regards to the report of the Commission of Inquiry. I am very sad to hear that the representative is saying that this report was not endorsed by the Human Rights Council. I would like to say that if the report was not, then I wouldn't be having a mandate to continue work on its recommendations. So it needs to be set straight. So this report is on the table, has been endorsed, and I had the opportunity and the privilege last year to come here in front of you and to present that report to the whole of to this hall. So having said that, I will thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity, and I do hope we will see tangible progress in human rights in Eritrea.
I thank the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea and delegations for their participation in this interactive dialogue. I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Eritrea.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to thank all those who, in their interventions, stress the importance of constructive partnership with the promotion and protection of human rights, as well as expressing their concern about politicization, double standard, and selectivity of the human rights mechanism. I have to refer to the report of the Human Rights Council. I draw the attention of the committee to check the resolution that was adopted last year. Specifically, the Human Rights Council noted the report of the Commission of Inquiry. That is what it is. I think I need to also point to that fact. Let me turn to my statement. My delegation did not mention Djibouti. However, we note with regret that Djibouti has made its business to attack Eritrea at the behest of others in all fora, the Human Rights Council, Security Council, and the CERF Committee. Eritrea would like to reiterate that it has already released all prisoners of war. More importantly, the human rights record of the government of Djibouti doesn't give it any moral authority to speak in this committee about any country. Let's be very frank. I mean, Djibouti is a country ruled by family. It's a country where the human rights of citizens is curtailed and abused. Violations occur with a sense of impunity. Djiboutian authorities have shot and killed 30 innocent civilians in the neighborhood of Balbala while celebrating a religious holiday. Almost 2 years after the incident, the families of the victims are still waiting to see their days in court. So charity begins at home, Chair, before pointing finger at others. The most appropriate thing to do is to look inward. Let's stop this hypocrisy. We interact in the CERT committee with a clear understanding that we all have to raise human rights standards everywhere. Djibouti, of course, is pursuing an escalating regional conflict under the pretext of human rights. Clearly, this amplifies the nature of the mandate of the rapporteur. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that Eritrea's door is open and has always been open for all those who want to genuinely engage in constructive dialogue and cooperation in the promotion of human rights. I thank you, Chair.
I thank Eritrea and remind delegations that the topic under discussion is the report of the Special Rapporteur, and I give the floor to the representative of Djibouti.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to exercise my right of reply following the accusations made
de l'Érythrée, et je tiens à vous indiquer.
I apologize. I have to take the floor and remind delegations that there is not a right to reply under these interactive dialogues. I have given you the floor on this item as such in an exceptional manner, and I will allow you to finish what you have to say, but I just want to stress that there is not a right of reply. And before I continue, I have a point of order from Eritrea.
Chair, I concur with your ruling. I mean, this is an informal setting. There is no right of reply. So that has been very clear. Thank you, Chair.
So I give the floor over to Djibouti for 1 minute on this topic.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I wish to indicate that Djibouti has never been the subject of any commission concerning human rights on the Republic of Djibouti. Djibouti cannot be compared to countries such as Eritrea, where all of the threats and the systematic violation year after year of human rights committed since 1991 with summary executions and other illegal actions. They go door to door, even in the hospitals, and even there's nothing to restrain them. The Eritrean authorities torture and terrorize their own people. Those who have the strength to follow this or have the courage to follow this, they're executed in accordance with the shoot-to-kill policy. And there are retaliations by the authorities. This is the sad reality that exists in that country.
And with that, I reiterate my thanks to the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea and delegations for their participation in this interactive dialogue.